Hey there, Micah. So, in advance of your reply, I wanted to go ahead and make this little video just to quickly go over the main ideas that we covered in today's lesson. And these are also pages available in our Chapter 5 listening module. So, the first main thing we talked about was the difference between hearing and listening. Hearing being the physical parts of the body that receive sound waves. Not everyone has the ability to hear. Some people are born deaf, some people become deaf. So again, hearing refers to the physical, actual, sound waves going into your ear. Now, listening, on the other hand, is how we interpret and make sense of those sounds. So from there, what we talked about was the first page in our module, key concept, types of listening. So we talked about different types of listening and why we might employ them. I'll get into those in just a second here. And then the other thing we talked about, the other key concept, was faulty listening behaviors. So these are behaviors that we usually accidentally fall into that are negative or have negative results. Usually types of listening in which we're not actually listening. So we'll get into those in just a minute here. So first, types of listening. We talked about relational listening, supportive listening, task-oriented listening, analytical listening, and critical listening. Relational listening is when you, the receiver of a message, so the sender, again, is the one who's initiating from point A to point B. They're sending the message. That's the sender. The receiver is the point B, the person who is receiving the message, who's getting the message. So in relational listening, we, the receiver, the listener, are trying to connect emotionally with the speaker or the sender. So we are trying to basically show through how we're listening that we understand, that we relate to them, that we see ourselves as similar, and that we are sympathetic, or even better yet, empathetic, going back to one of our earlier terms, empathetic to what they're going through. So examples of relational listening, or how we can show relational listening or employ it, would be to make sure that we're giving the other person time to speak, that we're not rushing them to hurry up and get to the good stuff, that we're also not showing impatience, like or tapping our foot or like playing around on our phone. We also can show relational listening by reading between the lines. So by that I mean not just leaving things at face value. By that I mean if someone asks, if you ask someone, how are you? And they say, fine, and leave it at that, and you leave it at that, you're not reading between the lines. They might actually be fine, but usually there's a lot more to it than that. They're just okay. Are they bored? Is nothing really happening today? Are they in a good mood? Why are they in a good mood? What's making them happy? Are they in a bad mood? Is something bad going on? Why? The whats and the whys and the hows are really important. And the last thing that we can do to show or employ relational listening is to encourage people to keep talking. Not just don't rush them, not just read between the lines, pay attention to their tone of voice, their emotional state, but also encourage them to keep talking in terms of if someone starts to cut themselves off, like, oh man, I'm going on and on and on, let me just shut up, you probably don't even want to hear it. Being like, no, I do want to hear it. Or when sometimes you might hear people kind of trail off, like, well, no one's really listening anyway. This is an opportunity for you to go, please continue. I want to hear what you have to say. It might feel a little cheesy, it might even be a little awkward, but you're going to make that first person feel seen, and in this case, more importantly, heard. So Then we have supportive listening, which I feel like is kind of similar, but it's different from relational listening in that supportive listening is not just seeking to show connection, not just seeking to show understanding. It's seeking to help the other person figure out a problem. So it has the goal of helping the speaker deal with a personal problem. So good examples or good aspects to practice for supportive listening are to ask questions. How can I help? Where do you need me? When do you need me? Rather than just jumping in and offering it, which strangely enough can be more overwhelming to this person, especially if they just want you to hear them out. Sometimes the best thing we can do to help a person figure out a problem is just to be a sounding board where they can bounce ideas off of us. And with that, hesitate, hold back from giving advice. Again, especially if someone just wants to be heard, spouting advice at them, even if it's good advice, is likely to make them feel like you're not even listening. You're not even listening to me. Also, sometimes we might be misunderstanding the situation, so then our advice might actually not be that useful. Also, the last part of supportive listening is to avoid judgment. And this, of course, is yet another reason to avoid giving too much advice or giving advice too quickly. It can come off like we think we're smarter than them or we think we know better, even if that's not how we're thinking or feeling. Or it can make the other person feel like we are judging them for having the problem that they're having. Like, oh, well, if you were more responsible, you wouldn't be dealing with blah, 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 blah. Again, we might not even mean that, but communication is about a lot more than intention. It's about, in this case, we're talking about how people listen, how they interpret what they hear. So then we have task-oriented listening, which is really what we're doing when we're at work or at school. It's listening to help get crucial information to help complete a job. So we're listening for key ideas, like in this video and in our regular lessons, I shout out key concepts to you guys. Those aren't just words, they are visual or verbal, and then also sometimes visual indicators. This is an important thing. Like right now, we're talking about a key concept, something that you will need to remember, that you will need to know, to understand, not only this chapter, but the next presentation that we're going to begin next week, that we're going to start working on. With task-oriented listening, it's even more important that we ask questions because it's not just a personal matter on the line. If we're trying to complete a job, that could be actually our job, like for work or for school. Either way, there's a genuine, measurable consequence for errors. So it's better to, as they say, measure twice and cut once. Talking about in construction, it's better to measure a piece of wood both twice to make sure that your measurement is correct, rather than to cut it and then realize you cut it wrong and have to either cut it again or get a new piece of wood. All right, and there are two more things to do with task-oriented listening, things that I've actually talked to you guys about much earlier in the semester. Taking notes to remember what was said, to get the key ideas. Taking notes, especially if you're writing, like handwriting, actually links to memory. People tend to remember things better if they physically wrote it down. But also, the last piece of this is to paraphrase, to put things in your own words. So this is something I said to you guys early on. I encourage you to take notes, not just to remember things, but to have them in your own words. When you're paraphrasing something, when you're putting it into your own words, you're forced to interpret it, to first check, do I understand it? What is my understanding of it? And then go from there. All right, there are two more types of listening, two more types that we do want to go for and that we might use at different points of time, and usually based on context. There's analytical listening and there's critical listening. Analytical listening has the goal of ensuring total understanding of a message. So just making sure that everything is absolutely clear, that we are not misunderstanding or misinterpreting or forgetting something or missing something, overlooking something. It's going to sound very similar to critical listening, but they are different. So analytical listening means that we are just taking in the information without forming any judgment. So rather than focusing on our reaction to what is being said, we are just making sure that we understand literally just each word, the meaning of each word, and the meaning that's being given across. Then we also need to make sure that we are separating the message from the speaker. So not only do we need to make sure that we are understanding what's being said to avoid not just miscommunications, but miscommunications that might lead to hostility. We're separating the message from the speaker. So that means regardless of what is being said, even if we don't like what is being said, we make a point of not turning those emotions, positive or negative, to the speaker. So one example that I gave in class today was in high school, I had a teacher who was definitely like a mentor to me, expressed interest in me in a time in my life when nobody else really did. Like no adults, no other like people really cared about what I thought, what I said. And this person was very knowledgeable and I thought very kind, and I looked up to them. And so I viewed them as a good person. And then one day they started posting things on Facebook about basically very like hurtful things about people from other countries, about immigrants. And I was just like so floored, like this message does not match this speaker. That's because I was failing to separate the speaker from the message. I was, although I don't agree with what he was saying, I was feeling like, well, he's a good person, so like maybe he really didn't mean this, like he's a good person, so maybe this is not really what he said, but very much what he was what he was saying. He was intentionally expressing hurtful ideas about people from other countries, and it was my inability to separate my idea of him, my idea of who he was, with what he was actually saying, which created a lot of kind of inner turmoil for me. Now, more often than not, when we're talking about separating the speaker from the message, we're talking about, don't shoot the messenger. Just because you don't like what someone said doesn't mean that they're the one saying it. They might just be passing along, a common belief. The difference between some people believe that blah, blah, blah versus I believe that blah, blah, blah. Okay, and the last part of analytical listening is to search for value. Frankly, at certain times in our lives, there are situations where we are not that interested, we are bored by what is going on, by what's being said. So we need to actively ask ourselves, what can we get out of this? Actively think, okay, how does this relate to different parts of my life? How can I use this information? Does it connect to something I've already experienced, something I already know? Making those connections for yourself sometimes is going to be necessary, especially if the other person isn't doing it. Okay, there's one last type of listening, that is critical listening. Critical listening is designed to assess the quality of a message. So basically, not what is being said, but how well is it put together? How much sense does it make? Most importantly, does it have evidence, proof, or is it just made up of opinion, which is not actually an effective communication many times? Is it credible, meaning the speaker, are they credible? First of all, are they trustworthy? If so, why? If no, why not? Credibility can also speak to like expertise, authority. If someone is an expert in a field, they should be more respected. Their words have more weight than someone who does not have that same experience or knowledge. For example, if we were talking about, I don't know, let's just say the weather. You and I, we are not meteorologists. A meteorologist is someone who their job is to interpret the weather and what's going on and, explain it to us in layman's terms, in a way that we understand. A meteorologist saying, based on, my predictions, based on my analysis of what's currently going on, I predict that it'll snow tomorrow. That should be a lot more trustworthy than me, an English professor, who, although I have a certain amount of education, it's not in meteorology. it's not. I'm not a meteorologist. Me saying, well, you know what? I think it's gonna be an 85-degree beautiful day tomorrow. Not only would I be wrong, but also there's no reason to think that I'll be right. And then the last part of critical listening is to assess, or rather to look out for any fallacies. So one type of fallacy is an emotional appeal, basically where the speaker is trying to get you to do something or believe something based on a manipulation of your emotions, whether happy, sad, excited, surprised, scared, angry, whatever it might be. They're manipulating your emotions to get you to feel a certain way. Like the example that we used in class specifically was the commercials with the animals, like when they're trying to get you to donate money, to say like, if you don't give us money, these animals are going to be put down. And they show you the sad puppy pictures, and they're like, and they play that god awful song that it tugs on your heartstrings and makes you feel like a bad person. In the arms of an angel, fly away from here. And then they start saying, if you don't donate now, these puppies will die. It's like super, super manipulative and super effective, honestly. They get the visual manipulation with the images of the sad animals. They get the audio manipulation with the sad song. And then they have the guilt trip with their actual words.